Silence is not empty, and it is not gentle. It is interpreted as absence, yet it operates as presence. It withdraws, yet it exerts pressure. It appears passive while quietly reorganizing the field around it. The paradox begins here. What is least visible is often assigned the least weight. What is least expressed is assumed to contain the least intention. This assumption feels intuitive, and it is wrong. Silence does not announce itself. It does not negotiate its meaning. It allows others to project structure onto it, and then it accepts whatever structure arrives without correction. This is why it is misunderstood, not because it is subtle, but because it refuses to cooperate with expectation. Expression is treated as evidence. Reaction is treated as proof. Noise is treated as engagement. Silence interrupts this logic. It offers no immediate data. It creates a vacuum where interpretation multiplies without resistance. The mind does not tolerate undefined space for long. When no signal arrives, it manufactures one. When no position is stated, it assigns one. When no intention is visible, it invents intention anyway. Silence becomes a surface, not a blank one, but a reflective one. What appears there is rarely accurate, yet it feels convincing. This is where power quietly enters, not as dominance, not as control, but as asymmetry. The silent position requires less energy. It spends nothing correcting misreadings. It does not compete for validation. It does not confirm or deny. Others do the work instead. They fill the gap. They stabilize their own discomfort by explaining the absence for themselves. Silence remains still while meaning accumulates around it. This accumulation is unstable. It shifts with context. It changes with mood. It grows heavier without becoming clearer. Yet the one who remains silent is rarely credited with agency. Silence is treated as lack rather than choice, as deficiency rather than strategy, as weakness rather than withholding. This misinterpretation protects the silent position. It lowers defenses around it. It invites underestimation. Underestimation is not neutral. It shapes behavior. It determines who feels safe acting without caution. Silence does not challenge. It does not correct. It allows overconfidence to move forward unexamined. The paradox sharpens. Silence is mistaken for submission while functioning as leverage. It appears inert while altering dynamics. It looks passive while forcing others into motion. Those who speak are required to remain coherent. They must maintain alignment between thought and expression. They must manage contradictions in real time. Silence avoids this burden. It is not required to resolve itself publicly. It is not obligated to explain its internal state. This absence of obligation is rarely acknowledged, yet it is precisely where its power consolidates. Silence cannot be contradicted. It cannot be quoted inaccurately. It cannot be easily cornered. Attempts to interpret it reveal more about the interpreter than about the silence itself. Every assumption becomes a trace of internal structure. Every projection exposes priority, fear, or expectation. The silent position remains untouched by these disclosures. This is unsettling, not because silence threatens, but because it destabilizes certainty. Certainty depends on feedback. It requires confirmation. Silence offers none. Without feedback, confidence becomes speculation. Speculation becomes narrative. Narrative hardens into belief. Belief feels solid, yet it is constructed entirely in response to nothing. Silence does not resist this process. It allows belief to solidify unchecked. It allows conclusions to be reached without interference. From the outside, silence looks like disengagement. From the inside, it is something else entirely. It is restraint without explanation. It is observation without disclosure. It is position without declaration. This is why it is often judged morally rather than functionally. Silence is accused of indifference. It is blamed for discomfort. It is framed as avoidance. These judgments simplify what is happening. They make silence legible by assigning motive. They reduce ambiguity to something manageable, but the reduction is false. Silence does not require motive to be effective. Its impact is structural, not emotional. It alters the distribution of effort. Those seeking clarity must work harder. Those seeking reassurance must expose themselves more. Those seeking resolution must reveal their stakes. Silence reveals none of its own. This imbalance is rarely tolerated for long. Pressure builds. Interpretations intensify. Meaning is demanded. Yet silence remains unchanged by demand. It does not accelerate. It does not respond defensively. The longer it persists, the more attention it attracts. Not attention as interest, but attention as unease. Unease seeks explanation. Explanation seeks language. Language seeks confirmation. Silence offers none of these. What appears weak begins to feel immovable. What seemed empty begins to feel deliberate. What was dismissed starts to reorganize perception. At this point, silence is often confronted, not directly, but through indirect attempts to provoke response. Escalation replaces inquiry. Still, silence does not shift. This creates a fracture in expectation. If silence were truly powerless, it would collapse under pressure. If it were truly disengaged, it would dissolve. Instead, it holds. The high paradox becomes unavoidable. Silence is not a void. It is a boundary that does not announce itself. Boundaries that speak are negotiated. Boundaries that remain silent are discovered too late. This is where misunderstanding becomes permanent. Once silence is labeled incorrectly, all subsequent interpretations follow that label. Evidence is filtered to fit the assumption. Silence does not correct the error. It does not offer relief from misjudgment. It does not rescue others from their conclusions. It remains exactly as it was. Not empty, not weak, not neutral, and not finished revealing what it withholds. Silence operates internally long before it is noticed externally. It is not an absence of reaction. It is a regulation of exposure. The mechanics are quiet and precise. Perception slows, attention narrows. Impulse is intercepted before it reaches expression. What would normally surface is held back, not suppressed forcefully, but filtered. Only what is necessary is allowed to pass. Most of what arises is observed and released without form. This creates a private interior rhythm. Thoughts occur without urgency. Emotional spikes flatten before they become visible. Narrative is delayed. Delay is misread as emptiness. In reality, it is sequencing. Silence reorganizes the order of internal events. Feeling does not immediately become language. Reaction does not immediately become behavior. Interpretation is postponed. Postponement changes everything. When perception is not rushed into expression, it begins to separate itself from identity. Thoughts are noticed as events rather than declarations. Emotions are registered as states rather than commands. This separation is subtle. It is not detachment. It is distance without dissociation. The internal narrator quiets, not erased but reduced in authority. It no longer insists on coherence in real time. Without constant narration, experience loses its pressure to be resolved. Contradictions are allowed to coexist. Ambiguity remains intact. This is uncomfortable for systems trained on immediacy. Silence requires tolerance for unfinished internal states. It demands the capacity to hold tension without discharge. Most internal regulation relies on release. Expression becomes relief. Reaction becomes stabilization. Silence refuses this cycle. Instead of releasing tension outward, it redistributes it inward. The system absorbs rather than expels. Energy is conserved rather than spent. This conservation is not passive. It is active containment. Containment creates boundaries that are invisible from the outside. Internally, these boundaries are felt as restraint. Externally, they are perceived as absence. This mismatch produces misunderstanding. The silent individual experiences density. The observer perceives vacancy. Inside, attention is occupied. Monitoring increases. Signals are tracked without response. This tracking is continuous. It notices shifts in tone. It registers inconsistencies. It maps patterns without intervening. Intervention would collapse the structure. Silence depends on withholding narrative feedback. Once feedback is given, dynamics stabilize. Stabilization favors the most expressive force. By remaining silent, internal regulation avoids premature closure. It keeps options uncollapsed. It preserves flexibility. Flexibility is invisible. It looks like indecision. It is not. The internal system remains adaptive because it has not committed. Commitment would require declaration. Declaration would require explanation. Explanation binds perception to position. Silence keeps perception mobile. This mobility is often mistaken for detachment or apathy, but internally, engagement is high. The difference lies in where the engagement is located. It is not projected outward. It is contained inward. Contained engagement alters emotional self-regulation. Feelings are experienced without amplification. They are not escalated through expression. Expression magnifies emotion by externalizing it. Silence interrupts this feedback loop. Without amplification, emotion passes more quickly. It leaves less residue. It does not demand justification. This reduces reactivity, not because emotion is suppressed, but because it is not fed. Silence starves escalation. The cost of this regulation is isolation. Internal states remain unshared. Validation is deferred indefinitely. This deferral creates internal confinement. The system becomes self-reliant for meaning. External confirmation is neither sought nor received. Interpretation happens alone. Over time, this builds a closed loop. Perception feeds analysis. Analysis feeds restraint. Restraint feeds further silence. The loop is stable. It is also narrowing. As expression decreases, internal reference becomes dominant. The world is observed, not negotiated. Interaction becomes asymmetrical. Others speak into the silence. The silence absorbs without reply. Absorption without release increases internal pressure. Not explosive pressure, but compressive. Compression sharpens awareness. It also reduces permeability. A silent position becomes harder to enter from the outside, not because it is guarded, but because it does not signal access. This is the internal confinement. Not imposed externally, not enforced deliberately. It emerges from regulation itself. Silence maintains control over exposure. In doing so, it limits connection. Connection requires exchange. Exchange requires disclosure. Disclosure violates containment, so silence holds. It holds perception, it holds emotion, it holds narrative. And in holding, it gradually closes around itself. Nothing escapes. Nothing enters easily. The internal mechanics remain efficient. They also become enclosed. The power remains intact. The space around it grows smaller. Impulse does not disappear in silence. It waits. The internal system does not eliminate desire, reaction, or urgency. It delays them. Delay creates friction. Self-image depends on control. Silence becomes evidence of that control. The absence of outward reaction is folded into identity. This is where conflict begins. Impulse arises as movement. It seeks discharge. It pushes toward expression with the promise of relief. Self-image responds by tightening containment. Expression would fracture coherence. Reaction would contradict restraint. So the impulse is held. Holding is not neutral. It converts motion into pressure. What is not expressed does not dissolve. The system begins to split its attention. One part monitors impulse. Another part monitors appearance. Appearance becomes priority. Not appearance to others, but appearance to the internal standard. The internal standard is precise. It demands consistency. It rewards silence with a sense of superiority disguised as composure. Impulse challenges this structure. It introduces unpredictability. It threatens exposure. So suppression intensifies. Suppression is framed as discipline, as maturity, as strength. The framing stabilizes identity. It also conceals instability. Each impulse that is restrained reinforces the self-image. Each reinforcement increases the cost of failure. The margin for error shrinks. Impulse does not negotiate. It accumulates. The system begins to feel dense. Thoughts loop without exit. Emotion circulates without release. Control becomes effortful, not visibly, but internally. The silent exterior remains intact. The interior becomes crowded. Impulse starts to express. Self indirectly, through tension, through micro-adjustments, through internal rehearsals that never become action. These rehearsals grow vivid. They simulate expression without consequence. They offer relief without exposure. But simulation is incomplete. It never fully discharges energy. It leaves residue. Residue alters perception. Neutral events feel loaded. Small provocations feel disproportionate. The system responds by increasing control. More silence. More restraint. The self-image hardens. It is no longer just controlled. It is defined by control. This definition narrows acceptable experience. Certain emotions become incompatible with identity. Certain impulses are labeled unacceptable before they are understood. Rejection happens preemptively. Impulse becomes something to defeat rather than integrate. Conflict becomes structural. The internal dialogue shifts, not toward understanding, but toward containment. Language becomes corrective rather than exploratory. This correction suppresses nuance. Everything is reduced to risk assessment. Expression is evaluated only by consequence. The question is no longer what is felt, but what can be afforded. Affordability replaces authenticity. Impulse continues to arise. It is natural. It is inevitable. Each time it is blocked, it does not disappear. It fractures. Fragments of impulse leak into thought patterns, into dreams, into sudden irritations with no clear source. The system denies ownership. These fragments are treated as anomalies, as noise. Noise is suppressed further. The gap between impulse and self-image widens. Maintaining alignment requires constant vigilance. Vigilance consumes energy. Fatigue sets in quietly. Control begins to feel brittle, not visibly unstable, but internally strained. Small deviations cause disproportionate internal correction. The system overcompensates. Restraint tightens even when unnecessary. This creates rigidity. Rigidity reduces adaptability. The self-image becomes less flexible. Impulse becomes more threatening. Threat perception escalates. Impulse is no longer just inconvenient. It is dangerous. Danger justifies further suppression. Suppression intensifies conflict. The system enters a feedback loop. Impulse pushes. Control resists. Resistance increases pressure. Pressure increases impulse. The loop has no resolution. Externally, nothing changes. Silence remains consistent. Composure remains intact. Internally, coherence begins to fracture. The self-image requires constant defense. Any slip would invalidate the structure. The fear of collapse grows. This fear is rarely acknowledged. Acknowledgement would itself be a loss of control, so it remains implicit. The system continues to function. It appears stable. It feels increasingly unstable. Impulse begins to surface in unexpected ways, not as expression, but as disruption. Attention drifts. Patience shortens. Internal criticism intensifies. The silent posture remains. The internal state becomes divided. One part holds the line. Another part presses against it. Neither yields. Control is no longer smooth. It is enforced. Enforcement requires force. Force generates resistance. The system becomes adversarial toward itself. Impulse is not listened to. It is managed. Management without understanding increases alienation. The internal environment feels less cohesive. Parts operate without coordination. This is not chaos. It is fracture. The fracture is quiet. It does not announce itself. It spreads beneath the surface. Silence continues to function as power, but the power is unstable. It no longer flows. It constrains. What was once restraint becomes rigidity. What was once regulation becomes suppression. Impulse waits. Control tightens. The structure holds, but it does not feel whole. The pattern is sustained by a belief that rarely surfaces. It does not announce itself. It operates beneath language. The belief is simple. Exposure is risk. Visibility invites loss. This belief is not irrational. It formed as protection. It organized behavior around survival rather than expression. Silence became shelter. Within this belief, withholding is safety. Restraint prevents damage. Distance preserves control. The system learned that remaining undefined reduced threat. If nothing is revealed, nothing can be targeted. If no position is stated, no position can be attacked. This logic is internally consistent. Silence is not chosen because it is superior. It is chosen because it feels safer than precision. Precision commits. Commitment narrows options. Narrow options increase vulnerability, so ambiguity is maintained. Ambiguity feels spacious. It keeps outcomes open. It delays consequence. The belief equates delay with protection. This belief does not judge expression as wrong. It judges expression as dangerous. Danger is not moralized. It is anticipated. The system is calibrated to minimize exposure, not discomfort, not effort. Exposure. Silence satisfies. This calibration efficiently. It reduces trace. It leaves little behind. Others may misinterpret. Misinterpretation is tolerated. Correction would require disclosure. Disclosure violates the belief. The belief is not conscious. It is felt as instinct, as tightening, as hesitation before articulation. When impulse approaches expression, the belief activates, not as thought but as signal, a pause, a contraction, a subtle withdrawal. The system interprets this signal as wisdom, as caution, as maturity. It is none of these exactly. It is protection refined into habit. The belief assumes the environment is volatile, that attention is dangerous, that clarity attracts pressure. Silence diffuses attention. It allows the system to remain peripheral, to observe without becoming a focal point, to exist without being examined. This reduces immediate threat. It also limits engagement. The belief does not aim for isolation. Isolation is a side effect. Its goal is containment. Containment of self. Containment of consequence. Within this framework, silence feels responsible. It prevents escalation. It avoids misunderstanding. Ironically, misunderstanding increases. But misunderstanding is less threatening than exposure. Being misread feels safer than being seen accurately. Accuracy invites response. Response invites evaluation. Evaluation invites loss of control. The belief prioritizes control over connection. This prioritization is protective, not false. It worked once. It reduced harm. The system remembers this success. It continues the strategy long after the conditions change. Beliefs that protect do not expire on their own. They persist until questioned. This belief resists questioning. To question it would require visibility. Visibility would violate it, so it remains intact. It organizes silence as virtue, as discipline, as intelligence. It discourages exploration of alternatives. Alternatives feel reckless, risky. The belief is not extreme. It is quiet. It operates through omission. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing collapses. Life proceeds within narrowed margins. Silence continues. Control remains. Exposure is avoided. Yet something subtle shifts. The belief that protects also constrains. It limits range. It filters experience. Certain possibilities never fully register. They are dismissed before reaching awareness. This dismissal is automatic, efficient, unexamined. The system feels stable. It also feels slightly compressed, not trapped, contained. Your belief holds everything in place: impulse, expression, connection. It does not announce its cost. It does not demand loyalty. It simply continues. Protective, consistent, uncertain. The silence it sustains still functions as power, but the foundation beneath it has never been inspected and remains unresolved. The cost does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates. Silence does not collapse the system. It preserves it. Preservation over time becomes erosion. What was once restraint begins to thin. Experience. Range narrows quietly. Variation diminishes without being noticed. The internal world remains orderly. It also becomes repetitive. When expression is consistently withheld, feedback loops disappear. There is no external correction, no friction that forces recalibration. Perception begins to recycle itself. Thoughts reference prior thoughts. Interpretations confirm earlier interpretations. Assumptions harden through lack of challenge. This feels like clarity. It is actually closure. Without exchange, internal narratives lose elasticity. They become efficient. They also become brittle. Silence reduces exposure. It also reduces input. The system continues to analyze, but the material grows thinner. Observation replaces participation. Understanding becomes theoretical. Over time, emotional texture fades. Not numbness. Flattening. Feelings still occur. They register less depth. They pass with less impact. This is not relief. It is quiet subtraction. Moments that once carried weight now register briefly and dissolve. Reactions feel delayed. Responses feel abstract. The internal system remains calm. It also feels distant from consequence. This distance accumulates unnoticed. Connection requires presence. Presence requires risk. Risk has been avoided consistently. As a result, attachment weakens, not severed, diluted. The system functions independently. Reliance on others decreases. So does resonance. Silence maintains control by reducing entanglement. Entanglement is where cost is felt. Without entanglement, loss is minimized. So is gain. Nothing dramatic is lost. That is why the cost is missed. What disappears is subtle. Spontaneity, warmth. a sense of being moved rather than informed. Life becomes legible, predictable, manageable. Manageability replaces vitality. The system is not unhappy. It is not distressed. It is quietly diminished. Internal regulation continues to perform efficiently. Emotions are processed. Impulses are contained. But something no longer arrives. There is less surprise, less friction, less disruption that would require reorganization. Reorganization is where growth occurs. Silence resists it. The system stabilizes into a narrow equilibrium, stable, unchanging. Time passes. The absence is not felt as pain. It is felt as neutrality. Neutrality becomes the default. Excitement feels intrusive. Intensity feels unnecessary. The internal standard adjusts. What once felt alive now feels excessive. What once felt engaging now feels demanding. Preference shifts toward minimal demand. Minimal demand aligns with silence. The cost deepens. Memory loses contrast. Experiences blur. Distinct moments merge. The internal archive grows orderly and pale. There is no grief attached to this. Grief would require attachment. Attachment has thinned. The system continues to operate. It functions well. It functions alone. Loneliness is not acknowledged. Acknowledgement would require valuation of connection. Connection has been deprioritized, so the cost remains unnamed. The silent position still protects, it still prevents exposure. It still avoids harm, but it also avoids depth. Depth requires immersion. Immersion requires surrender of control. Control has been the organizing principle. The system does not recognize what has been traded. Trade implies choice. This was gradual. Small omissions compounded. Moments passed unentered. Opportunities declined without awareness. Nothing obvious was lost at any single point. The loss is cumulative. What remains is functional clarity, internal coherence, emotional manageability. What is missing is difficult to specify. Not joy, not connection, not meaning. Something quieter. A sense of being fully occupied by experience. A feeling of being implicated rather than observing. Silence created distance. Distance reduced cost. Distance also reduced involvement. The system notices this only indirectly, through a faint lack, through a sense that life proceeds smoothly but lightly. There is no urge to change. Urgency would disrupt equilibrium, so the system continues. Silence remains effective. Power remains intact. But something has been quietly left behind, not broken, not mourned, simply no longer present. Awareness does not arrive as control. It arrives as space, not the space to act, but the space to notice. Silence has already created distance. Now that distance becomes visible. There is a subtle shift when the system observes itself holding, not judging, not correcting, just registering. The belief remains intact. Protection is still valued. Control is still prioritized. What changes is orientation. Instead of being inside the mechanism, awareness stands slightly apart, close enough to feel, far enough to see. This distance does not dismantle silence. It reframes it. Silence is no longer only restraint. It is seen as a method with consequences. Awareness does not demand expression. It does not insist on reversal. It notices the cost. Without dramatizing it, it observes the narrowing without panic. This observation introduces flexibility, not behavioral flexibility, perceptual flexibility. The system begins to recognize that silence is one configuration among others, not identity, not inevitability. This recognition is quiet. It does not feel like insight, it feels like loosening. Control remains, but it is no longer fused with self-image. Impulse is still contained, but it is no longer treated as threat by default. Containment becomes optional rather than compulsory. This optionality is subtle. It does not announce itself as freedom. It feels like margin. Within this margin, the system can allow sensation to register more fully, not to act on it, just to let it exist without immediate filtration. This is not vulnerability, it is contact. Contact does not require exposure. It requires presence. Awareness brings presence back into the silent structure. The belief that sustains silence is not challenged directly. It is acknowledged. Acknowledgement reduces its total authority. Protection remains valuable. It is no longer absolute. Silence can still be chosen, but it is recognized as choice. Choice introduces responsibility, not moral responsibility, structural responsibility. The system becomes aware that every withholding shapes experience, not only externally, internally. This awareness does not force change, it makes consequence visible. Visibility alters relationship. Silence is no longer invisible to itself. This is not mastery. There is no sense of command. Impulse still arises, control still responds, but the interaction is witnessed. Witnessing interrupts automatic escalation, not by stopping it, by slowing identification. The system does not become expressive. It does not become open. It becomes observant of its own closure. This observation is the only shift. It does not promise expansion. It does not guarantee connection. It creates distance from inevitability. Within that distance, the structure breathes. Silence remains powerful. It still withholds. It still protects. But it no longer defines the entirety of the internal landscape. There is room now for awareness to move, not to change anything, just to remain present as silence continues. This presence does not resolve the paradox. It holds it, and in holding it, the system recognizes something quietly important. Power that is seen behaves differently than power that is assumed. Nothing is dismantled. Nothing is replaced. The silence stays, but it is no longer alone.